It doesn't faze me at all.
Okay, we're ready to start the committee of the whole meeting. If the board, again, can make sure you have your microphones on. Now. Okay, good evening. The hour being 7:22 PM on Monday, February 12th. I'd like to call the Village of Brookfield Committee of the whole meeting to order. Bob, can we have a roll call for the committee meeting, please?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Naramatsu is absent. Trustee Gilhuli?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
President Garvey.
Here. Thank you, Bob. Okay, the first item under regular business is we have a discussion concerning the Intelligentsia Cup bike race event scheduled for Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. For those of you that don't know, we had a little bike race in town last summer. And we're here tonight to talk about if we should do it again. Staff had we have a memo from all the departments that were involved. We have Chris Valdez from our friends at Cycle Brookfield here. And let's face it, we've all been talking about this for a while since the event last year and how it went, but we felt that we should talk about it publicly in terms of making a decision about going forward. So the way for the members of the public that are here, we have a very detailed memo from staff from all the different departments related to last year's event and suggestions and ideas and recommendations about going forward. So I'm going to ask our police chief, Mike Curvilla, to come forward and kind of summarize the staff portion of it. And then I want to thank Chris Valdez from Cycle Brookfield for being here. I'm going to call up Chris also too. And I don't know if you both want to come up at the same time or Mike go first and Chris, and then there'll probably be questions from the board and then we'll take any public comments and input. So Chief, if you'd like to go first.
Sure. Good evening, President Garvey, Board of Trustees. Thanks for a few minutes here. I'm going to try to keep this brief but comprehensive as far as a recap. So as President Garvey mentioned, we know last year on Wednesday, July 26th, the Village of Brookfield supported the Intelligentsia Cup bike race for the first time, providing the space for the race to occur along with municipal resources with primary sponsor, Cycle Brookfield, for the event to take place. The event was heavily attended and largely considered to be a success. We were recently notified that Cycle Brookfield president and co-founder Christopher Valdez would like to host the event in Brookfield once again. The same race route from 2023, supported by Cycle Brookfield, has been proposed. The event would result in street closures between approximately 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. In your memo, we've gone over just a summary of how that event looked for us from the various departments. As Vince Smith, the Director of Public Works, is here as well, he can also attest. The police, it was an undertaking, but a very, a positive one from our different perspectives. Police department, it was a significant amount of staffing, and Lieutenant Hahn is actually here, who I had as our point person for the event. Last year, we used 19 members of the police department, including command staff. We had 7 distinct locations, and last year's priority, we did facilitate a partial opening of the Prairie Train Crossing. We were fortunate, we had some extra staffing assistance from Metro PD. We had a lot of resources loaned as well as utilized, UTVs, radios, and whatnot. As I mentioned, from the police department's experience, there was no significant police-related matters that were created or generated as a result of the race, nor did we have any significant influx, nor due to the significant influx of people in the area, because we did obviously notice, a lot more traffic and people in the area. But overall, we saw it as a very positive experience for the community. From the fire department, Chief Adams and Captain Brian Baldwin were there on regular duty, and after the event and just the evaluation of it, they were there to respond directly. There was one call, I believe, for medical response. So their assertion, Chief Adams' assessment and now recommendation would be to have actually 4 members of the fire department, 2 on each end of the course, staff for this event this year. Public Works, speaking for Director Smith here, as far as they utilize 6 members of the department exclusively, as well as many more throughout the day. They worked an additional 6.5 hours of overtime, and scope of work, varied all across the event. We also utilized an outside traffic control company for channeling services. Those are the concrete barriers, particularly that we use to keep the area on the south end of the race safe. That cost to the village, especially for the channeling devices, those are the concrete barriers, closed streets, and its extra signage for detours, cost the village $11,381.70. The last part of the memo here is just discussing, so that's the event, right? That was the event from all of our takes. The last part of the memo here is just discussing our proposal, or rather the 2 options that the board has to decide if you decide to support having the event here again. The police department, if the Prairie Train Crossing were left partially open as in 2023, the police department would need 17 officers. There's a breakdown here for the cost, as well as for the fire department. As I mentioned, they would require 4 members of the fire department, and then Public Works would replicate the same cost for staffing, and actually the traffic control company also provided a very similar quote. So breaking down from police department, fire department, and Public Works staffing and materials, we would be looking at $27,601 for a partial Prairie Avenue train crossing opening for that day, just like we did last year. If you were to support a full closure of the Prairie train crossing, similar to the previous construction that was taking place last year, that would change staffing needs and actually costs. The chart below would shows that we would actually reduce police staffing to 14, so there would be a lower cost in the police department. Fire, as I mentioned again, is 4 members of their department. That's going to be the same. Same cost for Public Works staffing, but the third-party contractor would actually be reduced to $5,413. Therefore, the grand total, if we were to close the Prairie Crossing completely, would be $18,840. Just 2 last things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris Valdez. In a recent meeting with the village engineering firm, we were discussing the possibility of a full closure of the Prairie train crossing for the Intelligentsia Cup. If that closure is permitted, it would also potentially allow the contractor that's doing work in that area to pave Prairie and Burlington Avenue, that intersection, during the Intelligentsia event. It would provide a safer environment for the contractors to work, and it could be expected that the contractor might assume part of the detour costs. Now, if you were to support that and we were to go forward with that, that would mean that the Prairie Avenue train crossing at that location at Burlington would remain closed for approximately 2 to 3 days, so that they can completely finish the work that's going to be done in that area. But they would work to time that right to happen concurrently with the Intelligentsia bike race. And the last thing, and that this is probably more Chris's presentation, Intelligentsia and Cycle Brookfield has identified the area north of the race course at the Prairie Avenue train crossing on the north side as an ideal spectator viewing area. as well as a potential site for their local business expo that last year was held at the library's side parking lot. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris.
Sorry, Chief,
Oh,
just for a
sorry.
second, if you could explain, because the part about paving or possibly tying it into the paving, could you explain, because you said something about paving it at the same time as the actual cut, but that area, if it, you're talking about shutting it down for 3 possible days and the paving goes on at that time, not actually during the race itself? Or Derek, or, sure.
On a racetrack, it's.
Right, it's south of.
Right, so as part of the Burlington Avenue project, we're installing a large storm sewer. Storm sewer will probably cross Prairie, it starts at the creek and it runs westbound. And we'll probably, with the sewer installation, that'll cross either in late March, early April. Our plan is to go ahead after that, we'll do temporary restoration, we'll patch it. And what we're doing is, we're not closing it, we're keeping half of the intersection open at a time. So we'll push the traffic over to the east side or the west side and work on the opposite half. When we talked about this with Mike, the possibility of full closure, we do have in there the full resurfacing, so we're gonna mill and resurface that intersection. Our plans, when we put those together last fall, called for another closure where we do half of the intersection at a time with traffic on the other half, and then we switch over. If we were to close that until, is it an event in July, Mike?
Yeah, July 24th.
Yeah, so the thought would be not the day of the race, but maybe the week after, we'd take another few days while it's still closed, everybody's used to the detour, and we could do a full resurfacing. It's safer, it's very tight to have the 2 lanes of traffic in each direction while we're working on the other half. You get a better product, you don't pave half of it and have a cold joint down the middle. So if the board does choose to go in that direction, there's some nice benefits for the intersection paving.
So if we closed it down for the race, which is Wednesday, July 24th, and we wanted to go that route, it would go into the following week in terms of it staying closed and paving that street, the final paving?
It would, there's a lot of, we haven't really figured out the days. If you wanted to close it down a little before, we could come in and get the paving done before and then open it up after the race. If you want to have the race closed down on the Wednesday and then Thursday, Friday, and yes, it probably would run into the following week, 1 or 2 days.
And I just want to throw in there, because looking at the calendar, because I remember last year's event quite well, that Friday after is a last Friday of the month, or last Saturday is the last Saturday of the month, so there would be live music on Grand. I assume that staff has factored that in. I mean, would we want the crossing to be closed? Or how would it affect the music on Grand if we continued to close it on that Saturday after the bike race? Is that a problem? Stevie, you're-
There would certainly be some traffic impacts, but with the detour signage and it being similar to the closure we experienced with that area's water main improvements, I wouldn't anticipate it being impactful in a negative.
okay. I just, I mean, because when Derek talked about the flexibility of the schedule, I mean, I'm going to open it up to the board later on, and we could talk about all the options in terms of partial closing, full closing, keeping it closed longer to do the construction, but I just want to know, you know, if staff's got a recommendation. I guess it doesn't have to happen at this point in time, how it might factor into that Saturday Night Live music on Grand. Would we want to try and close it down before the race and get it all done so possibly it could be open for the Saturday night? Or is it okay that it's closed down through the Saturday? That's something for staff to come back if the board agrees with closing it down and doing the construction. So just wanted to put that on your radar to think about it, so.
Derek, could you just clarify, is anything being resurfaced north of the tracks then? All this is on Burlington, south of the
This
tracks?
is correct. It's all south of the tracks.
Okay, so where the water main is coming is from the creek, but running along Burlington there, so there's nothing north of the tracks
Correct.
there, okay.
Right, and that's what I wanted to clarify, that there's no part of the area where possibly spectators and the vendors might be, that, you know, Chris is going to talk about, so. Mike, thanks for summarizing for the departments. Vince, while you're here, is there anything else you want to, Mike tried to summarize your department, but anything else that you wanted to add? No, I think he covered it. Okay, thanks. Chris, if you want to come up to the podium, Christopher, and Chris, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank
all
you.
the time
Yeah,
on
thank
this,
you, Village Board, for having me, President Garvey. I have a presentation. My name is Chris Valdez from Cycle Brookfield. We worked in collaboration last year with the village staff and police department to host what I thought was a very fantastic event. It's effectively called the Intelligentsia Cup. There's 10 stages of racing. It's a internationally recognized professional race series that comes to Chicago every year in the summer. The Intelligentsia Cup brings riders from all over the bike racers, I should say, from all over the world, all over the country, specifically all over Chicagoland, for 10 days of exhilarating racing. For those who are in attendance at the Brookfield event and maybe for other races, you see a closed circuit type of bike race. This is not like a Tour de France sort of style where bikes come in a big group and they pass through the neighborhood and you see them by and you wave. They go by in 30 miles an hour and you never see them again. This type of bike racing allows for heavy spectator use. It's great for large, dense areas like Brookfield, like the Chicagoland area has to offer, where you close down certain streets and bike racers starting all the way from novice, people like myself, very slow compared to the professional racers, would get out in the morning, and as the day goes along, you have different stages of a race. You have 30-minute racing up all the way up to a minute and 15, an hour and 15 minutes of racing, professional racing. So I'm going to ask staff, thank you, to play a video by a local videographer and photographer that's going to summarize the activity that happened for the day. I hope the sound comes out too. Great, thank you, Stevie. Thank you. Pretty great video, I think. But as I know, many of you were there at the event for last year on July 26th, as staff has already mentioned. We had about 4,000 plus attendees from around the area come to Brookfield directly to watch and spectate on that day. There was 9 specific bike races that happened that day, as I mentioned, all the way from novice to the women's and men's professional race that happened at the very last end of the day. In between the women's professional race and the men's professional race, we had a family fun ride, which the members of the community and President Garvey were out there on their bicycles, touring the course, getting out there as fast as you possibly can, which was a fantastic turnout for our event. That specific event was hosted in participation with some of our local businesses. For instance, Gears to You ran the Family Fun event. We had a lot of sponsors from our local businesses like Fill My Jar, Irish Times, Beach Ave Barbecue. All were part of the sponsorship that we had to put on the race and to make it successful. At the very end of that, I like to highlight this a lot, and hopefully police don't give bike racers tickets, because I don't want tickets anyway. But the top racer, Robin Carpenter from Legion of LA, came through the race course at the final race, and the men's pro race at the final race for the day. He came through at almost 45 miles an hour. So to show you kind of the speed that these bike racers come through here, it is not just like you jumping on your bike and tooling around town. This is professional bike racing that was here in Brookfield for the first time in 2023. And of course, with collaboration from the village itself, from staff, and I would be remiss to say police specifically and fire were fantastic throughout the event and coordinating a very safe and fun event that I will remember for my time. It was a very hot day. I'm surprised I was able to stand on my feet until midnight that evening, but as I'm sure many of you can recognize, the attendance that was there, the atmosphere that we saw from that, and the volunteers that we had all supporting this very first time large-scale internationally recognized event was well received, I think, throughout the village. So my pitch here tonight is to ask again for continued support. We have been asked by the Intelligentsia Cup directors, and I have Tom Schuler, who's here with me as well, who invited us back, who gave us the news in December and said, Brookfield and Cycle Brookfield did a fantastic job. You guys held a first-year event, which is no easy, small feat. Fantastic job from the village. village, fantastic job from police and fire, and from the group at Cycle Brookfield and all the volunteers. And they asked us to come back for a returning year in 2024. So I'm standing here to ask the village board, President Garvey, for support of this event in 2024 again. And I have a couple other slides. If we can go to the next one, please, Stevie. As Chief has already highlighted, we do not anticipate to change the course for next year. I had the pleasure of speaking to many of the bike racers myself, specifically some of the professionals, and they said, wow, what a fast, amazing race course. As you can see, there are two very hairpin turns that are there. The first is what we call effectively turn 1, which comes down Grand Boulevard, turns really tight left turn onto Prairie, continues on a Grant, Sunnyside, Lincoln, and then right by the library, we make another left-hand turn, which that fast straightaway allows the bike racers to really open up the speed. So what we saw from last year was a very, very fast race. We had many vantage points for spectators to see and view all along the race course. I'm not sure if anyone from the community, from the staff, walked the entire course, but it was fun to see. There was lemonade stands and party atmospheres. I had a few lemonades from some very fantastic young children in the neighborhood selling very cold lemonade on a very hot day. There was music. There was the neighborhood embraced it. So having this race course as is for next year, I think, is a well-suited opportunity to continue that. We also had a lot of support from the businesses that are along Grand Boulevard. Some of the businesses I know, Little Owl said that they tapped out of kegs. I know that Burger Antics said they were selling out of food. Paisans and Sebastian's all had a good return for the day, considering most of the village, and probably some of you yourself, didn't really understand or know what a criterium-style bike race would bring to the village of Brookfield. I think unanimously there was an encouragement coming down from the Prairie Ave businesses and from the Grand Boulevard businesses that this was a very well-supported, very well-attended, high-visibility event for their businesses. So we don't propose changing any of the race course. However, as Chief Mike did highlight here, the Business Expo that the library graciously allowed us to host within the confines of the parking lot. There were some access issues to there, and I'm remiss to say that was one of the issues that have come back since the event. That the businesses that were located within that little confined space of the library did not have a lot of foot traffic. It was not the large spectacle piece, which is of course at the tail end of the race, turn 1, right by the Prairie Ave and Prairie and Grand Boulevard confluences there. So as Chief and I were in conversation prior to this, closing down the Prairie Avenue crossing for the 2024 event is another request that I'm bringing forward. Closing down that Prairie Avenue crossing will bring two items that I'd like to bring specifically. One, in my view, and as I rang from last year, is safety concern. My primary concern, and as president of Cycle Brookfield, is always concerning safety, either it's for cyclists, pedestrians, or any spectators at one of our events. We are extremely keen on safety. We work very tightly with police and fire continuously throughout all of our events. And as this is an extension and probably the largest scale event that we will ever bring to Brookfield, highlighting the safety aspects of closing down Prairie Avenue again would be continued. We were very fortunate last year that we had no incidents with that crossing and the high volume of foot traffic that we see. We anticipate higher volume of foot traffic and spectators to come up for 2024 with a lot of collaboration, not only from the village, but some of the organizations that have jumped up and said, we want to make sure this event is highly attended. So from a safety aspect, we'd like to see Prairie Avenue closed down. Also, if Prairie Avenue is closed down, north end of that crossing would possibly allow for the Business Expo to be there. That would maximize the viewer and spectatorship that would come through, the possibility that these businesses, small businesses that are not immediately along the race course would be able to host business and see some possible turn for them for the event. So that closing brings two potential opportunities that we see that we are proposing here today to bring forward. Thank you, Stevie. From the outside of the staff and village costs, I put down here a basic entry fee of what it costs Cycle Brookfield to put on the race. The Intelligentsia series is they bring, as we've all witnessed and came through, that they come through every night for 10 days. It's quite amazing. If you don't get to see them, didn't see them last year set up and break down, it's amazing to see how efficiently they break down and clean the area. I walked through it about 10 o'clock at night after the race, and I could not tell a bike race came through, and there was 4,000 plus people visiting traffic. And I'm going to say that that's because of the work that Intelligentsia does year over year for 10 straight days in this area. They bring down, they bring barriers, they bring their stage, they bring all the rolling equipment that's required to bring that. So that is a fee that Cycle Brookfield will incur, and we'll find a way to support that from there. We have different opportunities from race purses, so that means that those who win a race or have other opportunities, and some of our staff, some of our business owners were able to go on stage and actually hand out some of those race preems, as they call them. So Annette from Fill My Jar and Martin from Irish Times, to name a few, were up on stage supporting their business and supporting the race by handing out dollars to the bike racers as they came through the line. So we're going to find, Cycle Brookfield is going to find a way to hopefully increase that race purse, because the more money that comes in, the more bike racers want to go fast, and the more bike racers want to come to the race. They're professionals and they do it for money. So the bigger the purse, the bigger the draw. Of course, we had some marketing and some event support costs. We have a large volunteer group that we want to continue to support. Cycle Brookfield takes on liability insurance for part of this race as well. And any road repairs and permitting that comes through, we're asking for as in-kind services directly from the village. So totaling approximately about $21,000 would be Cycle Brookfield on the hook. Also in coordination with whatever the village is needed for. I don't think we need any repairs. I think the course is actually still, I ride it all the time. It's actually really good. So hopefully there's no additional road repairs that have come through, and thank you for the support that happened last year to do that. So any additional outside of this would come from an in-kind support from the village. Thank you, Stevie. So just at a brief, again, we highlighted here some of the main support businesses. For instance, the Lino Sokol Francis Brookfield Library was a major supporter of ours. Not only were they a great vantage point for the race and a cooling center on this extremely hot day. If you did not get a chance to go to the second story, if you attended the race in 2023, great point to see that tight turn at high speed. Also a great spot to cool off, have snacks, and to visit the library that we have. The Brookfield Economic Development Commission graciously approved or recommended that this event continues. Chamber of Commerce, the zoo, Bank of Brookfield, for instance, and many more businesses put forward not only dollars, but support in social media marketing to make sure that this event will work through. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to them for making this event successful, and they've also come forward and said they will continue to support this event moving forward for 2024 if the village approves the race moving forward. So as far as next steps, I'm here tonight to propose, as I mentioned, not only bringing the race back for 2024, Wednesday, July 24th of this year, but also to close down the Prairie Avenue crossing for the two issues that I mentioned, for safety and for the opportunity to increase the Business Expo Center on the Prairie Avenue side, the north side of that Prairie Avenue. If that is moved forward, we will then sign the contract. Cycle Brookfield will take the lead again on this race, execute the contract very likely in the next 24 hours or 1 or 2 business days. I'm sure Tom wants me to sign it tonight if we can, but if the village approves it, we will gladly go in contract immediately following this meeting. Following that, we will continue to pay as Cycle Brookfield. We will take on the liability to pay for the race, ensuring that the race returns for Wednesday, July 24th. And then all through May and June, we will be in deep preparation. I spent a lot of time at Village, and I'm very gracious for the Village staff time to not only to support my needs and of Cycle Brookfield and to bring the race, but ensure that we had everything that was buttoned up. I can't express deeply enough how a fantastic Village staff and police and fire were throughout this entire process. Very new to us at Cycle Brookfield, very new to the Village, but I think we knocked it out of the park from a coordination standpoint, and I would be very honored to partner with the Village again to put on this race. And then, of course, Wednesday, July 24th. If the race is approved, we will see another stage of the Intelligentsia Cup back here in Brookfield on that day, and hope to have your support on that. I'm going to hand over to Tom Schuler now, just to give a word on from the race side of the house why he invited us back to the race, if that's okay. President.
Thanks, Chris.
Sure, of course.
Thanks, Chris.
Welcome.
Hi, my name's Tom Schuler, 5627 West Washington Boulevard, Milwaukee. One of the partners in the Intelligentsia Cup. I just wanted to give you a quick top 5 were 10 days long, and this was day 6 last year. First year event here in Brookfield. Number one, we poll our riders from all over the country and all over the world on what is their favorite course. The new Brookfield course was their second favorite course, which is phenomenal because normally they like hills, right? And we don't have hills, but we have a really challenging course because of the Grand Avenue angled presence. Number two, it seemed to me from going and patronizing the bars and restaurants, they had a very good day. And that's really one of our goals, is to have it be an economic boon for the area. Number three, Cycle Brookfield was an amazing partner with all the things we needed to do, including that emergency porta potty bank we had to get mid-race to get those into the middle of the course. Number four, police and fire was phenomenal. We had many meetings on the front end and, you know, going over the things with DPW that we needed to do, and then seeing that come together on race day was very satisfying. So I want to thank you and fire and DPW specifically, and the mayor's office. Number five was the amazing turnout from the community. You know, we never know how, and a lot of it has to do with Cycle Brookfield and their publicity of this event in the city, but we never know who's going to turn out. And this was a phenomenal turnout for a first-year event. So if we had 4,000, we can expect more next year, I'm sure of that. So I'm here to answer any questions, but along with Chris, that you may have specific to the race.
Thank you so much for being here, Tom and Chris, in the presentation. And I was there, a lot of us were there last year, and, the feedback, I had a chance to sit with some of the cyclists afterwards up on the rooftop of, the building, and to hear the excitement about the route. I mean, I want to know who's number one. You can tell me afterwards who we got to beat to become the number one. We're kind of competitive around here, but to hear genuine excitement about the route itself, about how exciting it was, and the neighborhood involvement and the community involvement. There were some blocks. I mean, there's people already talking about having block parties and things along the route, where there were some of the residential streets that really had a lot of fun and got into it and had parties going on out in the lawns and the businesses and things. So I think it was very exciting. And I appreciate you acknowledging all the work of village staff and the village employees, because, the police, the fire, the public works, I mean, there, of course, as you guys know, there's the day of, but there's also the build-up to it. And I'm just going to come right out and say I'm in favor of doing this again, but, I mean, this board is well aware of what we put our staff through this summer and the month of July, because there's a few things going on in July. There's a little parade that we have that takes some time to get ready for, build up, long day for police, fire, public works, getting ready for long day. Then we had some concerts in the park, and then we had to get ready for a bike race, and we had a bike race and breaking down from the bike race, and we had music on Grand Boulevard. By the end of July, we had some pretty exhausted staff, but I want to thank you for acknowledging them, because it couldn't happen without them, and it did happen. I was very proud of how it came off. And, Chris, I've known you for a while, and you asked me to trust you, and I did trust you. You told me how great the Intelligentsia Cup people and how professional it was, and I noticed it firsthand. I mean, it seems as the last cyclist was finishing the race, they were already working their way down Grand Boulevard, taking it down, and it's something to see in action, the logistics that was done. And I know in speaking with our staff and the police department and the planning and everything that was going on that morning, it was very professionally run. It is a big commitment from the village. The hours and the staff time and the in-kind contributions is something that I'm going to ask the board to consider, but I'm also asking them to support it. Some people asked us, well, how much did the village make, or what was the impact? And I mean, you shared it with the businesses, and we've talked to the business owners. They did have a very good day, and they had a very good evening. I mean, and there's a learning curve there. I think not knowing what was going to happen, talked to some of the businesses, and they brought on extra staff early in the morning. They heard big crowds were coming, but in reality, the early morning doesn't draw as many people, so they had some extra staff on. But by the end of the day, as things started to build, and I can tell you that since then, I've talked to many of these businesses, and it's a long day, not just for staff, for the volunteers and everything else, but for the, the visitors. A lot of the visitors didn't necessarily patronize some of the places, but they saw the places, and many of the business owners have told me about how many people came back and said, hey, come back a month later, came back later that summer, came back this fall. Hey, I was here for the Intelligentsia Cup that day. I couldn't make it, but I saw your establishment. I wanted to come back. So it wasn't just the one-time exposure. It was the coming back and seeing it and being in that area and seeing our library. I heard a lot of comments about how beautiful the library is in the area. So I want to open it up to the board right now for questions and comments. I'd like to indicate that I fully support having the race again. I have had a lot of, and I've learned not to make decisions the night of. If the second the race ended, if we had to make a decision that night, I had people coming up to me saying, can we do this next month again? I mean, it's one of those things when the people that want the music on Grand every week during the summer, they wanted the Intelligentsia Cup back the following month, and I wouldn't do that to staff, I promise, but I knew that we needed time to go through it and think about it and deliberate on it, and to be invited back, it's very pleasing to hear that, we're invited to host again. So at this point, let me open it up to the board for questions and comments.
I do have several comments, questions. I guess one of the basic questions, can we go back a couple slides to the schedule?
The schedule that's presented is not finalized, but our day would be the 24th of
Okay.
July, just to be clear.
But I mean, as long as Brookfield wants to go forward with this, we're in for that date. Last year when we were talking about this, there was another community that we were kind of, racing with.
Yeah, the incumbent community the incumbent race gets their date, or a different date they might want.
Okay.
All 10 of our communities, and hopefully including Brookfield, will be back on the same day. So
Okay.
this, and we usually only have one change of a community each year, so, it's always good for me to go down the list. It's West Dundee, it's Glen Ellen, Winfield, Mundelein, Lombard, Brookfield, Northbrook, Elgin, Lake Bluff, and then Fulton Market is our final day. So, and right now, we're that's it. So yes, Wednesday,
Okay,
24th.
just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
How do sponsorships work out? Is that all to Cycle Brookfield, to
That's
Intelligentsia?
correct. Yes, that's correct. We, as Cycle Brookfield, as we take on we pay the Intelligentsia directors to bring the race forward. So we go to the local businesses and other organizations that care to support this, ask for different levels of sponsorship. Any business can support to any level. We were very fortunate to have a lot of sponsorship come from, we had some from directly from the zoo, from the bank, all bringing in more than $1,000 from some of these sponsorship levels. And many businesses supported either through in-kind or through other level of direct support. I'll quote Martin from Irish Times specifically. He jumped for joy when he says, he's like, what do you need? How much do you need? And tell me when you want it. And he jumped for joy because he recognized that the need to bring in an event like this is significant. So he was very happy to support it to almost any dollar. I probably could have asked him to support the race in full. I curbed that back, but he was very happy to support. So Cycle Brookfield takes on that cost structure to bring all the race structure, to actually bring Intelligentsia to the actual course. We bring that on from all the sponsorship opportunities.
Where would you picture the business expo being? You said north of the crossing, but are you thinking more by the triangle or more?
Correct. It would be, so the race course hugs, it's hard to visualize here. I'm not sure, Stevie, if you can go back to there. That's probably a good one. But that first turn along Grand Boulevard and Prairie is a very large intersection. We were able to see not only, not only were we able to close down the intersection, we were able to place some of the blockade material that police and fire were able to park there. There was a large portion of intersection that was very, very available for that. Not only would it be a fantastic viewing spot because of the gradient that we have going over the crossing. If you imagine standing by Locomoca, for instance, and looking down, that's actually a really fantastic viewing spot, just from a viewer's. I mean, to sit there and see the bikes come through, and I'm sure some of you who witnessed coming through in that turn at those speeds is fantastic to see from that viewing standpoint. So being able to stand there all day long and then patronize some of the businesses that are mobile within that expo center would be a high impact for any one of those businesses that are there. So it would be in that little triangle section, Trustee Ketchmark, that would be right there within that zone, which we believe is enough space to host. We have to figure out spacing precisely after, if it's approved, of course, post police and fire assessment, how much available space would we have available to us to keep it safe and secure.
I do have to admit, last year as we were talking about this, I was somewhat skeptical of this. It's a big event. There's a lot of risk to this event for the town. There is inconvenience, and going forward, we do have to include the business community. We have to make sure we keep the residents as part of this. A lot of leading up to the event kind of mimics what you said early on. So Brookfield having a bike race, and you hear that from people, you're having a bike race, well, what is that? You show up the morning and you see what was set up out here. This was such a unique event for the town, such a great way of showcasing the town. I think it went over fantastic. How do we promote it where it's more than Brookfield having a bike race? Your video is great. I mean, getting that out there more. Last year we had to show the video of another community and what they were doing, but now we can show ours. But, 4,000 people, Chief, you got to be ready for a bigger crowd. I think this was a great event for the town. I'm wondering, in the other towns, is there anything, because echoing President Garvey's comments, we did hear some of the comments from the business early on. You didn't quite have the traffic out there till you got till 4:30, 5 o'clock. Do any of the other towns do anything more event-wise to pull people out early on, whether it be entertainment or?
There are opportunities to do that throughout the race day, and of course the Expo Center can host some of that that inclusion. The opportunity, and of course from a year one, just to be very frank, from a year one perspective, it was we at Cycle Brookfield got right to the dollar amount, like I think by the penny of what we needed to support the race. Part of that was from the naivete of the community, from the business owners, and from the marketing, even really from within the internal Cycle Brookfield team. A lot of us, were unsure of how to promote this successfully, but by the skin of our teeth, we made it. We pulled the event off. So hopefully, with the data, with some of the material, and with some of the marketing that we were able to collect from last year, not only will we be able to increase some of the opportunities for participation, either from music or other type of things, but once we have an approval, of course, then we're going to kick off kick open the sponsorship opportunities. So as much as we can sponsor, the more we have sponsorship, the more that we can also do for the community to make it more of a party aspect. I can tell you Lake Bluff, which is the 9th stage of the series, has a very good turnout. They have a lot of, if you ever walk that course, and is sort of a deep business district that happens there, the residents really get into it. So the residents, have this party atmosphere, and as President Garvey already highlighted, the more you have your residential areas populated, the more happens. You can promote some band shells within the outer spaces. There's more things that we could do. If Cycle Brookfield essentially had more money and had more sponsorship, we would put all of that toward other things that would draw people to this area for the race.
I think it was a very good event and very good for our town.
Thank you.
Not as skeptical.
That's good to hear.
I've got a couple too, but I'll be quick. You guys, one of the great things that Cycle Brookfield did last year was be very careful about notifying all of the businesses on the course and all of the residents on the course. Are we going to take the same steps this year to do that?
Absolutely, yes, of course.
Excellent.
Yeah, I personally walked into every single business on Grand Boulevard. I gave each one of them my cell phone. They all know me very, very well by this point. So I said, if you have any questions, concerns. In fact, ABC Learning Center that morning called me and said, or the day before, and they said, we don't know how we're going to get our children safely in and out of the event. They were very concerned with it. I rallied pretty quickly, and we were able to get some additional parking space with one of the other business owners along the alley, so the parents can easily drop in and off their young children to the learning center there along Grand Boulevard. So yes, we will continue to do that, continue to inform the residents, and of course, with more notice and more opportunity here, we're going to continue to either promote that with the assistance of the village, of course, and the other organizations like the Chamber of Commerce and so forth to help us get the word out more.
Sounds great. And then I'd like to say I'm absolutely in favor. And I think I would like to see us tie this in with resurfacing on the south side of the tracks. But I think I would want to make sure that we're not doing any of the construction activities on race day. I think that could be really problematic. Smells and particulates and, I mean, sound, could be too loud. I mean, a whole bunch of problems. So I think that there would be some coordination there that we might need to do.
From my perspective, it'd be great if the village closed it down for construction and not for a bike race. But it'd be great that it wasn't closed for the race, but more for out of necessity, and was this a well-timed event. So if it wasn't that Cycle Brookfield closed on Prairie Avenue, but rather it was a coordination, that would be great. Just saying, it would be really nice to separate that.
Yeah. Let's go next. I'm in favor, and I definitely am in favor of closing Prairie. It seems to make sense for all of the reasons you mentioned. I know we talked about it last year as well. I think for the safety purposes, above all else, that makes sense to me. All the other coordination sounds great, but the safety is number one. I don't have any other questions because you all presented amazing information, and I'm just really excited that we have the opportunity to do it again.
Thank you. Yes, and from a safety perspective, Lieutenant Nick Hahn, who he and I became very close with all the planning and prep, I'm sure he would love to have additional safety measures put in place by closing that down. I don't want to speak for him, but he and I became very close throughout this process, and I'm highlighting him because he was amazing throughout that, and safety was our main concern throughout the entirety of the day. So thank you.
I'd like to echo everything that everybody's been saying. That day was so fun. It was such a great day. I was lucky enough to get off of work early enough, so I was out there from like 10 in the morning until the end of the race, all the races. It was a fantastic day. Everybody was happy. It was a great atmosphere. I couldn't get over all the positive things that were said back. I don't remember one negative item about it. I think on the village side, the only emergency we had was a street cleaner broke. And then it had to be, we had we were going to borrow one from Riverside, but they were able to get another street cleaner in time. So other than that, everything was great. It was well run. It was well organized. While you have the floor, we are being broadcast, we are being recorded, et cetera, for future playback. So as this thing moves forward, which I'm sure it's going to, people who wish to donate, where would they do that?
CycleBrookfield.com. There you can donate directly to our organization. We have opportunities either become a member or directly donate. So what we do from our nonprofit group, as we are here in Brookfield, we accept membership, and membership is directly ties into how we support this race. But there is a donate now button, so we are happy to accept any level of donation that anyone would like to give. Yes, thank you.
Great. All right, I'll finish up here. Also a big supporter of this event. It was some of the most fun I've had in Brookfield, just watching that. Very, very exciting. And I will say, having friends and communities all around us and talking to a lot of people, Brookfield has a reputation for our events, right? Having a lot of them, certainly, and having kind of, diversity of different things for people to do and get involved with. So this absolutely, fits in with that reputation and elevates us because it is such a unique event. And I'll just say personally, one of the things I loved was not just seeing people I knew come out, but seeing other people I had never met in Brookfield come out. And I certainly saw and met people from other towns, but I was watching and listening to other people who both lived in Brookfield, connecting with each other, saying, "Oh, I've never met you before. Oh, really? I just live around the corner. Oh my gosh, I never knew that. Didn't know you were interested in this kind of thing," right? And so it really created these connections that I think might not otherwise have been made. So I think that's a huge reason to do things like this in town. And also just seeing people of all ages being involved, whether they're spectators or for the family ride or volunteering, right? Or just, just being around it was really wonderful to see. I'm in agreement that, of moving the little expo towards the tracks there. I could see crossing just created some issues and really didn't create enough activity within that space, that parking lot. So I love that idea of moving it. That corner at Grand on the northwest corner there, I think is also a great opportunity because it seemed to be a big entry point for people parking elsewhere and then walking there as kind of the north entrance to being a spectator. But also a lot of the bikers too were parking right there along Park and, camping out and in their big campers and whatnot. I think it's a great opportunity there for some signage of here's what this is, because a lot of people walked up and said, what's going on today? What is all this, right? Or, oh, I can see that it's a bike race. Well, what kind of bike race? Is it, maybe some big signage that says, oh, this is a criterium, and it's it could be intelligentsia advertising, it could be Cycle Brookfield advertising, and just a few basic things of what it is and what you should be watching for, right? Like you're gonna see racers go around, for a minute for this one and, an hour for the last one. That way, it is an all-day event, right? So people can kind of, having that schedule on a big poster would be super helpful because people can't necessarily stay there all day. But they might say, I gotta run, I gotta go, maybe if they're working from home and they could come back at 3:00 or something. So that I think would be really helpful. The other thing that I heard people say, which I also think would be helpful, having moved from that spot down to like the really kind of exciting area with the grandstand, and all of the announcers, is putting a speaker, if somehow that could be broadcast to that location, because it is such a big meeting spot and a lot of people are going into the library and that big, huge curve, is having some sort of loudspeaker so we could hear from there, like what's going on down in the, at the finish line. Or maybe it's just somebody relaying that from time to time, not throughout the whole event even.
Since you live there, can they put it on your porch maybe?
Sure, you want me to do it? We can have Dennis do it. He's got a loud voice. So I just a thought there. The other thing, the T-shirts, whoever was selling T-shirts, I think it was Cycle Brookfield or the Chamber, they were really fun. And people were like scrambling everywhere. Where can we get T-shirts? How can I get something to commemorate this event? So I would just highly suggest more of that. I think you'll get some funds back there, right? If you could sell some of those early in the day, and I think you'll have a lot of people branding and representing, because they'll be really proud to have this here again. So,
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'll speak in a couple of terms if you don't mind. So yeah, I was fortunate or maybe courageous to go onto social media about a week or two on our Brookfield Connections group that we have here, and I put a poll just asking, who would support this race coming back, and I think it came back to 99% yes, which is quite surprising. There are about 1,000 votes, and as I'm sure most of us might know, Brookfield Connections gets a lot of visibility and sight. So some like Trustee Ketchmark, vocalized and said, I was against this race, and they were like, wow, amazing event, and I can't wait to see it back again. So that's very true. To your signage, and yes, if we move that Business Expo Center from the library parking lot out there, that opens up other opportunities. And of course, if we had more sponsorship opportunities and something, we could do other things within there. So we were working, just to be clear, with a very limited amount of funds. It was very tight amount of finances that we pulled everything off, and it was a great way for us to, if we are so fortunate to bring this race back again, and then to have additional sponsorship opportunities, we will do more. Also, to President Trustee Ketchmark's statement there, the more we have to work with, the more that we're going to increase, either signage and speakers and things like that to inform whoever is there for the day. And from the third point, we were very happy. We had a art committee, so the graphics that were on the T-shirts and some of the signage there, we had a local artist actually submit we put a contest out, and so we had a handful of artists submit a design to Cycle Brookfield, and we selected a local artist, and that artist became what was on the T-shirt, what was on the posters, and that is now commemorated right now in T-shirt and poster form. So Brookfield artists had some visibility from that, and we were happy to that artist became a member for the year, if I think correctly, and we used that poster all throughout, and that became the face on social media and every other piece of marketing. So if we're fortunate again to bring back the race, we will continue that, bring more artists and anyone who can support our race in any which degree. We found some possibility with that.
Great, yeah, I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward
Chris,
to it.
Chris, to clarify, I wasn't against it
Oh,
as
sorry.
much, no, but here, because I think this is important for all of us. It was a skepticism of, okay, this is a first-year event, how many people are gonna come out? What does this mean to the town? And I think you guys do this all the town, and, you know, all these other towns, and we have a lot of events here. When we have events, we wanna make sure we put on a safe, fun event. But the safety is key to a lot of that. And I mean, we talk about how many officers are out there. I mean, we're bringing 4,000 people into the town. You know, I mean, that's a big event. You know, things can happen. I mean, it's a nervous day for a lot of staff, you know, too. So there is skepticism that goes with that, and we want to make sure we do a good job. And now that we have a year under our belt, we know some of the things we can tweak, but we can't take any of that for granted either. We still have to be, you know, on our toes, and you know, it's going to take a tremendous amount of staff time to work this again. I did have 2 questions as it relates to what you presented, though. With the paramedics, the event still has their own paramedic service, correct?
We bring in basically cuts and bruises. The most common injury is really just the rider slides on the road and gets up and they have road rash.
Okay,
So we treat that. The paramedics on site are really for transport or any major incident, which we did have one of, I believe. We did have a transport up at the library corner. But yeah, we handle the cuts and bruises. We bring in our staff for that.
okay, so it'd be our paramedics then that are part of that.
Yes.
And then there was a big difference in the cost if we closed the crossing. It was a much less cost for the contracted services if
Yes.
we close the crossing.
Yes.
So is there less barricades or?
Yes, so by closing the crossing, last year, we had that large U shape
Right.
with all the concrete barriers, and obviously Vince can speak to this, but by closing it, we can now remove that structure. They're gonna have their barriers for the race course itself, but we had all of that reinforced concrete barriers in the, you know, event that a car would make it over. We wanted to ensure that the race course was protected. In this case, if we close the crossing, all that reinforcement is going to be south of the tracks.
But the race course would still have the barricades on that curve there.
That's correct.
Yeah, we would, what we would do to create the expo areas, we need X amount of radius for the corner there, and that's all we need. So everything beyond that is spectator and/or expo. So we haven't figured out where we're gonna position things if we do it this way, but we had enough real estate for racing, safe racing, and then everything else is usable space up until some, you know, like, I think you mentioned the slope of the railroad tracks. We delineate with police and fire, you know, where the expo zone would be,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
I think we just gotta figure out how we make Brookfield the #1, you know, favorite track.
We have to know what number 1 is first.
We'll talk about that privately. We're a little competitive up here, but math is not necessarily strong. I don't have to count heads on the board. Obviously, there is very strong support to do the event again. I mean, that's obvious. I haven't heard anything from any board member that we do, and I knew it coming in, basically, because we've all talked about it. We were there. We've had the feedback since then, so we would love to have the race back. Also, what I'm hearing is that we would like to close the crossing. And I'll be honest, I was one of the advocates for keeping the crossing open last year, and I had my reasons, and, you know, I've been convinced by staff and also convinced by experience, because we've closed it down for other construction, and it worked. I mean, we get excited about things and the day of and everything else, but we realize this has impact on other things. So I'll admit that I was concerned about inconveniencing other people and causing traffic issues and things for people that, weren't involved, we all enjoyed the race. Some people didn't care whether we had it or not, but we have to represent everyone. But seeing how, and I always have faith in our staff, the way they handled the closing before for construction and what we can do, and the fact that we could tie it in. We're always thinking ahead, and that's what I love about our staff. We could tie it into this construction project. So I'm also getting a clear consensus from the board that there is the desire to close the Prairie Avenue crossing for whatever term and period, and you guys pick the time frame to match the construction to close down that, as long as the, public information is out there and we get it out there. I think that's clear from consensus from the board. I also, I right away after the event last year, I did walk and rode the whole course, and I did notice the kind of some of the lonely vendors in the library parking lot. It was a little tough to get to, and the library was wonderful for giving them that area, but logistically getting in there, having to cross the course of the race to get in there and stuff, made it difficult, and that was one of the number one concerns I had about it. I'm all in favor of leaving it up to you and coming up with an expo area there. But, when Tim approached me about this and what staff's recommendation was going to be, I do have a little bit of a concern, because I know there were some food trucks and some food vendors that were part of the expo center, and I think that's natural. I don't want to hurt our businesses on Grand and Prairie with that. And if there is a way, I know some of the vendors are, selling things other than food and drink. If there's a way to balance, I'd like to maybe make use of both ends of the course, and maybe if there are some food trucks or vendors, if there's an area at the north end that we could still use as some kind of, if it's possible, some kind of expo center, and have some food and drink and food trucks down that way that don't impact our established businesses on the 3700 block of Grand and Prairie. My thought, and me and Tim talked about this, is we have this excellent commission called the Brookfield Economic Development Commission that some of you might have heard about. Maybe they talk about this and have some input in terms of what the vendor area looks like and where it's at. I'm all in favor of having some vendor area right there at that big turn, but maybe have something, and if we, move it, to a little bit on the 3600 block of Grand, or, sorry, Trustee Gilhooly, that block of Lincoln, something for people at that end. And I love Trustee Gilhooly's idea of having speakers or announcing, so people at that end, we want people spread out through the whole course. We don't want everyone just on the 3700 block of Grand and Prairie. I think that's such a great area to have down there, and your idea for signage was excellent too. We want it spread out throughout the course, so I would leave it up to you, and maybe we'll leave it up to the Brookfield Economic Development Commission maybe to discuss input or give ideas, which some people on that commission. You could talk about that, but what you're getting from the board, I think, is a unanimous thumbs up that we want to have the race again, that we're willing to close down per staff's recommendation and your recommendation, close down the Prairie Avenue crossing for whatever's necessary, moving the expo center that way, and then you guys sort out the details. We're not trying to micromanage. We're just trying to offer input here as board members and as residents and observers of what happened. And we want to be number one.
I agree. Yeah, thank you, President Garvey. I am not a business expert. I'm as a commissioner on the Economic Development Committee, I'm happy to bring that forward, and I will look to partnership not only from that commission, but also from the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations who best know how to maybe host an event like this, but what works best for not only for the community, but for those businesses that would attend. So my goal is, and the goal of Cycle Brookfield would be to enhance the village and to enhance this event to hopefully make us number one, but to also increase it from what we saw from last year. So part of my goal, and granted that we move forward with this race, is to make it better year over year. And with 2024, my intention is to make it better than last year.
Thank you, and thank you to all the volunteers from your organization. I know this has been a tremendous amount of work. And again, everyone sees the day of, but I've seen what you guys have done year round and the education and the work on this, so thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you to the professionals at the Intelligentsia Cup. It was a pleasure working with you, staff. I was very pleased to. So, looks like we're having a bike race.
With your approval, we will move forward.
You're getting thumbs up.
Wonderful.
All
Well, thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next item, is a discussion regarding proposed streetscape improvements on Grand Boulevard and Brookfield Avenue. Again, detailed memo, but I'm going to ask Derek to present to the board and to the public, unless, Tim, you have any...
We're proposing another bike race. Turtle racing. No, not the turtle race.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay, good evening, President Garvey, Board of Trustees. We come here tonight, I want to give a summary of our resurfacing project on Brookfield Avenue and the 3700 block of Grand Boulevard. And then we want to present a funding opportunity for possibly adding some streetscape elements to the resurfacing project. So can you go back one? So what we have here, just a quick overview of the resurfacing project. We had the 3700 block of Grand Boulevard highlighted. We also have Brookfield Avenue, which begins at Prairie Avenue. The route runs east to Woodside. It does go north a block on Woodside up to Parkview, and it goes east on Parkview to Gulf. And there's a block of Gulf from Parkview up to Washington. That is the resurfacing project. That little snaky path is actually all considered part of the Brookfield Avenue collector route. The started back in 2020. We applied for STP funds for the resurfacing project. It's currently programmed in the Central Council of Mayors in 2026. And the estimated cost, the total cost is $1.89 million. It's a 80% federal share and 20% local share, so the village's share is little over the federal share is a little over 1.5 million. The village share is 378,000. And again, for clarity, this is still all on the resurfacing project. We have an opportunity to get some contingency funding from the Central Council of Mayors. We've talked about that before. We took advantage of it on Shields Avenue and Washington Avenue. As a quick refresher, we've got 11 transportation councils in northeastern Illinois and Chicago that all belong to one regional area that receives this surface transportation program funding. And the goal is for our region to always spend the amount of money we have, or we risk getting a lower amount of funding. So what they have in place is our council, the Central Council of Mayors, always expends the full amount that they get. They get about $3 million a year. But there are some other councils, including Chicago, that don't always have enough projects or just can't get the projects going in time to expend their money. So they have a policy in place there. If during the first half of the fiscal year, if there's some leftover funds, other councils can apply for that funding, and that's the contingency funding. And the one caveat is that you have to have your engineering completed or near completed in order to go ahead and take advantage of that funding. Again, the board, I think it was in 21, authorized us to do the design, get shelf-ready plans for Shields, Washington, and the Brookfield Avenue project. We were able to take advantage of contingency funding for Shields and Washington. That's how we got those paved last year. And we're going to be able to take advantage of getting funds for Brookfield Avenue and 3700 block of Grand in federal fiscal year 24. What we're currently targeting is a September 2024 IDOT letting. A letting's a bid opening. It's run through IDOT because it has federal funds, but construction wouldn't begin. It would take place all in 2025. So we came to staff, we looked at it because we're getting this contingency funding. And we also had, if you remember last year, we came to the village board with an ITEP application, Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program, for streetscape improvements. It was not only on Brookfield and Grand, it included parts of Fairview and Sunnyside. It also included some areas south of the tracks. It was over $3 million, and we were not awarded funding. But because this funding for the resurfacing is coming from the contingency fund. We went to the Central Council of Mayors, where they normally don't fund streetscape funding, streetscape improvements. Since it's not coming out of their annual mark, their annual budget, we said, can we go ahead and apply for these streetscape funds and get it through the contingency funding? And they said that we could, and we'd be eligible for 80% federal funding and, again, 20% local share. That's the same cost share we would have got if we were awarded the ITEP funding. So we've been meeting with staff. We are restricted to only using these funds on the collector route project that we had applied for. So we're proposing some streetscape improvement on the 3700 block of Grand. And on Brookfield Avenue, we were looking at streetscape improvements from Prairie running east to Arden Avenue. Scope of work on the 3700 block of Grand would include full sidewalk replacement, installation of brick pavers, street lighting, tree grates or planter areas, and there's some other minor amenities that we discussed. On Brookfield Avenue, it's a little lesser scope. We looked at putting brook pavers only on the south side from Prairie Avenue, approximately 135 feet east to that sculpture. We have a nice wide 10-foot sidewalk. We can go ahead and put a strip of pavers in there. East of there is really just a 5 or 6 foot wide sidewalk. It just isn't conducive to brick pavers. And we would also look at putting pedestrian level lighting. Initially, we looked at running from Prairie up to the bridge to tie to the 2 lights that were installed on the columns on the bridge. And then we talked more, should we run it up to the Village Hall driveway, kind of include all that. Then we actually ended up recommending we go all the way to Arden, tie in the baseball field, because east of that, it kind of transitions to residential. The estimated cost, this is just for the streetscape improvements, the construction and engineering, it totals approximately $1.385 million. Again, it's an 80% federal share, so we'd be leveraging $1.1 million federal dollars with our 20% local share of $277,000. So we're coming in, there's 2 decisions really. The first is, one, do we want to pursue the funding for the streetscape improvements? And then if the answer is yes, then we have design options we'd like to present to the board regarding street lighting, brick pavers, and tree grates. So I'd like to stop it here, because if we're not
Sure.
going for the funding, we don't necessarily have to discuss the design options.
You've done this before, Derek. You know how to, that's the number one question. And the fact that staff brought it forward, I'm going to ask a question I somewhat know the answer for. Do we have the ability to come up with a match?
Yes.
Okay. And where would those funds come from? Is Doug still hiding back there?
Yeah, these costs, just to be clear, are in 2025.
Sure.
So,
We'll figure it out. Right, Doug? We'd have 2 years, we'd have this year, and then we'd bring it forward to the budget workshop.
Right. I mean, because this board, we're always open to, applying for grants, but I mean, just because there's a grant doesn't mean we should take it. If it's something that's a project that we're interested in, which I'll open it up to the board to talk about that, but I
would
know
also-
that staff has the ability to come up with, they wouldn't be presenting it if there wasn't a viable option. We plan out our budgets and we kind of look at the budgets going forward, that we would be able to come up with our share going forward.
And I would like to add that if we go forward with, as Derek said, this 2A, B, and C, those are TIF eligible, so the downtown TIF could be paying for that share of it.
And the reason, I like the idea, obviously the Grand and Prairie area is an area we've spent a lot of time and focus on. I like the idea of moving it down Brookfield Avenue towards, we've talked about the possibly revitalization of the historical train station area. We built a bridge and put in a bridge there, and that's new, but some of the lighting and the events and things that we have at the Village Hall, to tie that all in to that, make it one natural area to flow down all the way through. And we have one of the best parks around in terms of the Little League field that's right on the corner there at Arden. It seems natural to tie that all in. And I was excited to see that there's some new lighting proposed along Brookfield Avenue, because, you know, now that the bridge is there and there's the new lighting on the bridge, it's still a little dark as you approach the bridge in that area. And we have pedestrian or commuter parking in the Village Hall parking lot, and there is a lot of traffic, foot traffic to events. People walk to events at the Village Hall and Kiwanis Park, the concerts in the park and things. So having that all tied in as a natural flow from the business area is something that excites me, so.
Yeah, I was gonna say the high pedestrian traffic, right, alone with the expanded farmers market, with the, you know, the holiday market that we had this year too. Right, all of the Little League stuff down towards the field in that direction, including all the other events. From the lighting to the pavers, I mean, even the business area on Grand there with all of the concerts and events. It's just a highly utilized area, and I think it's also visible from the train, which is always an important impression, I think, to make on the outside world. If people traveling by, we want them to get off the train and stop and want to walk around and, you know, and come enjoy our beautiful community. So I think it's a prime location for this, and that it's both for safety and for aesthetics is a good idea.
I'm completely in favor of going forward with this, but we just heard about the intelligentsia, and this would be in 2025. And if you want to stay in it, you know, you stay in it every year as opposed to dropping back out. So I would assume end of July would be another race, so we would have to do this around it, either complete it before that or start it after that, or somehow work it around so it's not affecting a bike race possibility in 2025.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had the same thought as I was listening to the presentation, and I don't have the answers how we do it, but certainly that is how we'd specify the job, that it has to be at a point where we can host the event, and it might be work before and after, or just before or after. But agreed, I think there's a way to get that done so we can still have the event in '25.
Awesome.
Derek, what does the street work consist of? It's really just milling and resurfacing, right?
Correct. There's minor sewer repairs. We always televise the sewers out there, drainage structures, a little bit of spot curb, but in general, it's just mainly a mill and resurface of the existing pavements.
Did we move on to number 2? Or no?
I'm sorry?
Do we move on to number 2?
I think I think I'm getting a consensus from the board that we're going to pursue funding for this, so yes, we're on to number 2, if yes.
So a couple,
I've got a little
You got
more
detail
on
on that?
two,
Okay.
and then it might, yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so we'll present some of the options, and what I'd like to do is kind of walk through each of the options. We'll start with lighting, and then I'd like to stop and just get feedback rather than presenting all of them. Let's approach them one at a time. So we met with village staff to discuss various lighting options. Obviously, we put the some lights up on Broadway recently. We were planning on using a similar style of light. We looked at a couple of options. The first option, which is what staff consensus would recommend, is to put a alternating roadway light and pedestrian light. And again, I kind of defined the roadway lights. I think we're familiar. They're taller. They're 25 to 30 foot high. It looked very similar to the lights that are around the circle right now, which don't have a pedestrian level light coming off of them. Those are roadway lights. And then in between those, they would be at a 70-foot spacing, and it would alternate. You'd have one roadway light, 70 feet later, you'd have a pedestrian light, 70 foot later, you go back to the roadway light, and we'd alternate it. That matches fairly closely to the spacing we have right now. You know we have pedestrian lighting out there now. It's not roadway lighting. It's a little taller than some other pedestrian lighting, but it's at a 60-foot spacing. And I have some pictures to show. So on the left, that's the light that is on the column on the bridge, which was, again, chosen to closely match what's out there, especially the luminaire, match what we have on Broadway. On the right, that's just a cut sheet of a similar type of a pedestrian light that we would propose. We're not looking for exact dimensions. We can pick out the arm. We haven't looked at banner arms. The banner arm doesn't have to be up high there. We're just looking for consensus that the village board would like to continue on with this style of lighting that we had selected out on Broadway. This is a picture of what a roadway light, just gives a little bit more scale. I will tell you, I didn't, in their catalog, find a great, this is actually a combination light. If you look off the backside, just by that tree, you see the lower level light, but envision it without that lower level light, and that's what the roadway lighting. So we'd alternate between a roadway light and then a pedestrian light. So we're providing a little more light out there on the pavement than currently exists by putting in these alternating roadway lights. We did look at a lighting design option number 2. This would be a combination pole. So it would be that picture we just looked at that has a roadway light up high, between 25 and 30 feet high. And then the pedestrian light would be off the backside towards the building, and that's typically at 12 to 15 foot. Because we're getting more lighting, because they're all roadway lights, we'd have a larger spacing. We'd have 105-foot spacing. And I'll tell you in the staff discussions, what we thought is, the combination poles I've seen are on busier routes. Like I know someone that has something very similar to the style we have even is Berwyn. If you go on Roosevelt Road east of Harlem, and they have the combination lights, and they're staggered they're about every 100 feet. We thought it'd give a little bit more of a downtown homey business feel by having some of these pedestrian lights mixed in with the roadway lighting. So that was staff's recommendation. That's that picture that's of the combination light. And I think at that point, unless there's more from staff, I can get some board input to see if there's a preference on alternate lighting, roadway and then pedestrian, or if we'd like to go with those combination lights.
What's most efficient cost-wise?
I believe the roadway, and I'll tell you, that's a great question. The estimate of cost is for the most expensive option, so it will only come down, and I wasn't too concerned with the cost because we're only paying 20%, but I believe the roadway lighting, because there's less lights at 105-foot spacing, would be cheaper. I don't have it here tonight. I can maybe look it up here in a minute, but I think it's a savings of 50 to 100,000 of the village share at most. It's a smaller number because we're only paying 20% of the costs.
Other questions, kind of were related to lighting. I mean, let's kind of go through this one by one. Let's option 1, option 2. Staff recommended option 1, and
I have some questions about the roadway style lighting and just all of those kind of second unit apartments. There's a lot of residential units that are above the businesses along Grand. And
Right.
would that higher roadway lighting be flooding extra light into their units?
So no, because we put a shield on the back end of those, and that's a common concern. We have to be careful with that. I know Forest Park and Madison Street has similar type of issues out there where you put a shield on the back end to make sure the lighting doesn't go back towards the buildings. So I will say there's the light, but you are going to see the bulb right up high, but the shield will block the illumination from casting towards the building.
Sure.
So Derek, are we approaching Grand differently than Brookfield, or no?
We were, Brookfield, when we ran the lighting design on the roadway, we couldn't get the entire pavement lit with just roadway lights up top. We looked at putting some on the south side. We get on the railroad track property. That back of sidewalk is right where the railroad BNSF right-of-way is, and we tried to avoid that. So yes, we were proposing along Brookfield Avenue to have just pedestrian lighting.
Just pedestrian lighting?
Just pedestrian lighting, right.
So, well, I was more concerned on Grand Boulevard, because we don't have roadway lighting really on Grand Boulevard right now, right? I mean, we have the posts, probably they're 12-foot posts or so all along there. So
Right.
there's nothing taller lighting the street per se.
Right.
So by adding these, don't we change the character of that stretch tremendously?
How so? By the look of the lights? We were trying to, by putting those roadway lights up on Grand, we were able to go ahead and meet the minimum lighting levels. So we don't currently meet those with our pedestrian lights that are out there. It is an option. A third option, I suppose, it was discussed, was you could just go back with all pedestrian lighting on Grand. Just realize you won't meet the minimum lighting levels.
Well, and I mean, your comment too with the, the baffle on the one side, so that would, cover the light for the buildings on that side, but across the street, you still have the second floor, third floor apartments, dwellings, right? You're still gonna be lighting.
But the dispersion of the light's like a cone, so it's not, the light on the west side
So
would
it shouldn't make it all the way across.
right?
It would seem like, that's why I say when you comment about Brookfield Avenue, that we're just doing the pedestrian lighting there, it would seem like that's what we would do on Grand Boulevard. I mean, you have a very pedestrian area there. I mean, there's a lot of character to walking down that street with the lighting we have now. It's going to be much brighter. It's going to look a lot different. Broadway's different than Grand Boulevard. I mean, you're much spread out. We had a lot of discussion on the lighting on Broadway, but this is a much smaller, more compact area.
So is your concern that it'd be too bright on Grand Boulevard with these lights?
It would be too bright. The lights would be out of scale with the overall width of the street and that there compared to Broadway. You're just, it's
I
very
agree.
different.
I feel like it needs to be more pedestrian level lighting, and if there's a way to work with the lighting levels of whatever fixtures to get closer to the minimum lighting, but I do think the scale, or even if there's roadway lighting at the intersection, like at the end of Grand down by Brookfield Breakfast or by Sebastian's, or at the, if there's something that needs to be taller to light the intersection more clearly.
But even the crosswalk. Derek, can you talk about what those minimum light requirements are and where they come from and what the significance of them is? Because I tend to agree that 3700 block of Grand looks dark. And, I mean, I don't say I want it lit up like, but what are those light standards? Where do they come from, and what's the significance of them?
Yeah, I think it's it's IES, International Electrical Society, has minimum standards, and it's more than just, it's a measurement of foot candles. That's the amount of light that's cast out there. But there's also minimum and maximum ratios. When you get too bright here and you go to a minimum, you get a lot of glare. So that's what we're playing around with.
Well, are we required to comply with something?
You're not.
So you keep saying minimum standards, like we have to, like there's some standard we have to meet.
It's typically, I'll say it's a goal, but on a municipal road like this, we're not required. On an IDOT road, we would be, but if we choose to just put up pedestrian lighting, that's okay. What it may help with this discussion, I don't have it with me tonight. I know Broadway Avenue is much brighter, and I believe is quite a bit above the minimum light levels. And why we did that was because the existing lights that were out there were very bright, and we were at a concern that if we reduced those drastically, even though we met the minimum IES levels, that there'd be complaints from the residents. So we tried to somewhat closely match what's out there on Broadway. That's very bright. That's not what we're proposing for Grand, even with the roadway levels. But maybe it would help. It's hard to convey because I can give you numbers, but they don't convey what it looks like out there. But I can get some lighting measurements and maybe give you some comparables of something that meets minimum levels, and you can take a look at that.
But even if the light levels, I tend to agree with Trustee Ketchmark about the character of the downtown area being different from the circle area. And I do lean towards a pedestrian level as opposed to having the taller. Now, I agree with Trustee Kaluzny about having the taller ones if we need at the intersection. But are we also talking about we would be replacing the lights all the way down down to Brennan Massage from, okay, so that whole section right there, that whole block. So that we'd be, I still think that whole walking area should be pedestrian level lighting.
There's another part to this too. I mean, this is Grand and Brookfield. So you have the stretch of Prairie too. So that would not be part of whatever funding we may or may not get for this, correct?
That's correct. We discussed that as a logical, maybe as a separate project, we would want to pick up that lighting.
Through
Say-
TIF funding or that.
Right, and
I
then,
mean, you're gonna have another, probably half dozen lights or something in there, right?
right. It's just that because our project application is for the resurfacing, all we can add is on that route of the resurfacing.
Yeah, I think that what you were mentioning, if it was coming before us for the budget for the workshop, I'd love to see that cost, but also what it would cost to do Prairie to look similar.
So Tim and Vince and I have had discussions, I think we're scheduled to go out for a drive in the next week or two, right? We have some, we want to look at that. Another opportunity I've thought for the village is, I'd like to see us look at tying in the lighting on this 3700 block with the circle. There are concrete light poles right now, they're not the ComEd lights on Grand, running from Grant up to the circle. All the events, we have all that pedestrian traffic, I think it'd be great to tie those two business districts together. Again, not part of this, but, so, yes, I would like to give you numbers for all of that for next year's budget for consideration.
Thanks, Derek.
When do these decisions have to be made before the application goes in?
So there really isn't an application on this because we're just adding it on to our existing project. We do have, I believe it's an April 12th submittal. So that's based on the resurfacing project. That's our first submittal. IDOT will come back with comments. The final submittal is in June, so ideally we flesh this out in the next couple months and at least be 80-90% there with our first submittal, and then if we need to make a few tweaks in the next month or two, we could.
I'm wondering if, this is not necessarily related to the lights, but it'd be related to the streetscaping. If there's a way to tie in some sort of gateway signage, the Grand Prairie District, whether it be, if it's south of the tracks, that's still TIF eligible, not related to the grant. Maybe it fits better there, but you picture the different neighborhoods of Chicago, or we've all been all over the country, you see the different, the signage that you would see across the street there. That could look really interesting, especially Prairie, over the years, Prairie was kind of desolate, other than the post office, and we see that whole district, you've got a half a dozen businesses there now that you really hadn't had before. I'm wondering if there's a way to include some kind of signage like that.
Along that,
Sorry, go ahead.
along those same lines, it might be wise to look at, rather than having the banners and the banner connections, to work towards some sort of more permanent signage like we've been talking in the last year. I think this would maybe be a great place to start it, since we're talking about new light poles.
Trustee Kaluzny for beautification, right?
Got that, Steve?
I'm already picturing an archway in that has
Couldn't you picture
the
that?
dragonflies and and the Brookfield Business District, Grand Prairie District.
Back to the lighting thing. I obviously, we got to question one. Yes, we're in favor of applying for the grant. I think what might be helpful is if you could point us in, maybe you mentioned a section, on Berwyn and Roosevelt Road that has certain lighting, but maybe something that we could look at that, I understand, several board members' concerns about possibly Grand Boulevard, that 37 block looking too bright, but maybe you can point us to another business district that has, because you're saying it won't be as bright as Broadway, but it would be brighter than it is now if we put in, the idea has been thrown out there about putting them just at the corners of the, right at the corners, but I mean, is there something in the middle? We have a pedestrian crossing in the middle of the block. I mean, I guess, I'm a visual, I kind of need something to compare it to see what we could do. But as long as we have some time to do this, I don't want to delay the submittal. Obviously, we can't delay the submittal, but maybe bring us back some options or things that we can go look at that we can think this thing through a little bit more. I mean, in terms of expanding, doing other things with, TIF money for improvements in signage and business entryway signs, I mean, these are things that we're always going to keep thinking of. But in terms of moving this forward, let's look at the lighting options and the streetscape, things that we can include in this grant, the planters, the tree grates and things like that, and kind of come up with the desired submittal on this, and as always, just keep working, the other things in as we move forward.
But going along with that, I mean, something like the banners or that, can we include that as part of streetscaping in that? Realizing part of it does extend beyond this area, but can part of the grant money be used with that?
For banners on the light poles in
Right.
particular? Yes, yes. And so I came tonight to kind of have the macro decisions made in front of the board, but we would come back, have much more detailed conversations with staff, and we can come back with banner recommendations. We talked a little about where you'd want some outlets out there. There was some discussion about maybe some speakers and that. So we'll come back with a lot of that. I kind of was focusing on some of the main ideas.
Yeah, the outlets and the speakers is things that I brought up in the past, just, for, things like the holiday celebration, to have holiday music playing throughout the district, or, lighting or temporary string light, Public Works has the challenge of there's not a lot of electric out there. And, I always bring this up when we talk about when we have the music on Grand, do we have enough electric and things there? Is that something we tie in while we're working in this area? I mean, it seems like we're going to be having music on Grand for a while, building the infrastructure, assuming the stage is going to be there, to having the electric and everything else we need for that going forward.
Yeah, it's very common to we're gonna have an outlet on every pole, maybe multiple. That's very common, and I would see us certainly doing that. And then we can look at more, even if you wanted just some separate electrical outlets at certain,
Well, knowing what events we
priority.
have and what we've had and how big they've come, you have some idea of like what we might need going forward to make things easier, that type of thing.
Right?
Okay, is that enough direction from the board at this point, from your perspective, Derek?
It is, yeah, and the lighting. We'll sit down with staff and we'll be back with more information.
And thank you again, and this is just another example, I mean, we hear this all the time, it's like, we have this opportunity because other towns and other councils don't have projects that are ready to go, they don't have their match, they don't have their plans, I mean, it's kind of, we don't have that situation where we're turning down grants because we're not ready to go or we don't have money, we're looking for opportunities, so that's a credit to, to staff and Derek's firm that we're able to take advantage of this. 80-20 match is a huge match, so and these are projects that we're interested in doing from the beginning, so again, thank you to staff, thank you to Derek for putting us in this position by having, plans and always thinking not just years, almost decades ahead for doing this, so thank you.
We do have two more.
Yes, oh, no, I'm sorry, no. I forgot about the other option, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. The next one I think is maybe an easier one too, is so right now from the back of curb to the face of the building is approximately 10 feet. We're proposing to put in our typical 2-foot of brick pavers. That's the same dimensions we have out there on Broadway Avenue. Same design, we'll put a concrete base over there. It's really helped with eliminating settlement issues. We did have one little wrinkle we'd like to throw in there for consideration. Can we hit the next slide? This is something I've seen, and I kind of like and wanted to see if the board liked it, is so when we do 2-foot of, those blocks are about 800 foot long, and we do a 2-foot strip of brick pavers along the back of curb, you end up with an 800 foot by 8 feet, just uninterrupted block of sidewalk. I've seen some villages where at the tree grates, which are about every 100, 120 feet, they go full width brick paver and they kind of break up that long run of concrete. I think it's kind of a nice look. This gives you an idea of what it could look like. Just looking for board input if that's something you'd like us to include in the project, or we can stay with our, what we've done in the past, which is just a 2-foot strip along the back of curb.
That wouldn't be my preference, but I've got different ideas as to what I'd like those tree grates to be, so maybe I'll wait to
Sure,
talk about that.
okay.
So the brick pavers that you see, Derek, could you go back to your proposed option? Those take away from your grate idea? I'm not trying to be.
No, not
It
really.
is a great.
No, I was asking trustee Hendricks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Sorry, Mike.
no, there is a grate there.
Right.
Yeah,
And this can be applied, we've got the next one, maybe we can jump to, we'll go to planners. Let me hit this first.
Sure.
This is the crosswalk, another thing, I think this is the crosswalk at the south end of the block. There's not a crosswalk if you flip one picture, there's not a crosswalk at the north end of the block, the brick paver crosswalk. We're proposing to put a brick paver crosswalk at the north end because it kind of defines our business, the end of our business area. So, unless anyone objects to that. Okay. Then going on to tree grates, and I said tree grates last planner areas. The tree grates are difficult for us because we have such a narrow, on Broadway and Grand, we have 10 foot from the back of curb to the buildings. We typically want to keep 5 feet from the building out towards the curb as our sidewalk for pedestrian walking. Here, back on Broadway, we put in really small tree grates to avoid having them break up the curb and gutter. This is part of that design back from the 80s. Just isn't, it's too small of a tree grate, in addition to just the root zone where we don't have a great excavation there. The trees sometimes outgrow the openings in the tree grates. So if you can go to the next. Here's another option that we had looked at. I believe this was out in Oak Park where they put curbed planter areas. You can include trees within these. Talk to staff. We kind of like these. There's another option similar to this that we've probably all seen. This is a curbed planter area with wrought iron fencing. We had a little bit of concern. They look nice at the start. I've seen a lot of these after 5-10 years where the wrought iron fencing seems to be in disrepair. Talking to Vince, a lot of these streetscape ideas, they're great, but there's a lot of maintenance on them. If you look at our poles out there, they're in bad shape. They look bad. If you look at our trees out on Broadway, they're dead too often and they just look poor. So the staff, at least, and I don't want to speak for all staff, my preference, if we went back a slide, I thought these planter areas, especially if we put some planters where the plants are a little higher, they're not ground level, so it discourages walking through them. If you want to put a tree in there. One of the reasons Vince liked the curb planter areas is because if we don't do those with the tree grates, get a lot of the runoff with the salt comes in, and it's detrimental to the plantings and the trees. This does give you the barrier of the curb that's around the perimeter, so we don't get that salt washing into our perimeter area. And then this is out in Lyle, on Main Street in Lyle. Vince actually brought this up. We could look at putting some seat walls. They're nice. They won't work. We don't have the room for them where we only have the 10 foot from the back of curb to the buildings. Where Lyle did is they bumped out and they took up the parking, so they have about 20 or 25 feet from the building out to the curb. They put in these nice seat walls. So we could consider that. We have a couple areas that are bumped out now, right at the intersection, at the south end, the intersection of Brookfield and Grand. If you wanted to put some seat walls in, you could there. And also at that mid-block crossing, it bumps out. However, we did acknowledge that we think we have seen some tables, and those are being used by the restaurants, so it's a little trade-off. If we put in these seat walls, we lose some of the room for the tables there, but we wanted to present it as an option. So this one, I think staff's, we have a recommendation, but there's you know, hundreds of options out there, so open for discussion on this.
I'd like to speak very strongly against the tree grates. They're not healthy for the trees. There's not enough room for those trees to grow, and lots of maintenance issues. For one thing, as the tree gets bigger, you're supposed to take those tree grates out of there, and that so many communities don't, and it's just, you just lose the trees. The second option that you pulled up is my preference. I've designed these. I've seen them work really well. And they give a lot more space for the roots of those trees to get water and get air and get all of the things that they need so that those trees might actually have a chance to survive in that sea of pavement there. I'd also like to see a lot more trees. We're really, really short on trees in this block of Grand. It could really be improved by a lot of these.
As you're looking at the planners, when we're talking about that, we're talking really just Grand Boulevard on that, right?
Yes,
And so nothing on Brookfield.
correct.
You know, one of the concerns I'd have, I like this idea as well, but Vince, what do you think about plowing, and what about the overhang of cars? I mean, you're losing something, I mean, if we have 2 feet of brick, so we're saying that planter's 2 feet off.
This planter's 2 feet off because of our 5 foot, our back of curb. Remember, we have a 5 foot space to work in with that planter, from the back of curb to where the 5 foot sidewalk runs through that's adjacent to the building. I'm envisioning these, back of curb being at our back, just behind our back of curb. There wouldn't be this 2 foot of walk, because we only have a 4 foot planting area even with that, because we have a 5 foot space and we have 2 6-inch curbs.
So we're saying that's right on the curb.
Right on the curb. We did consider the overhang. The cars right now, they typically overhang about 1.5 to 2 feet, but we do have those parking spaces on a diagonal to where they just won't be able to pull all the way up, bump their, like right now, they bump their tires up, or can bump their tires up right against the curb on the street. They wouldn't be able to do that at these planters. I will say, one of the thoughts we had too is it only affects like 1 or 2 spaces at each planter, depending on how long. We did not necessarily propose more planters and more trees out there.
But how do you keep them from not pulling all the way up?
Well, one thing you can do is plant them carefully so that in those areas where you would be having the overhang, you plant something that's not going to grow tall enough to be damaged by.
Right, but I mean, in terms of keeping the cars from planting or moving all the way up, I mean, there's no way you do that.
Well, they're not, assuming they don't hop the curb, they're not driving over the plants.
I think he's worried about the bumper scraping on the curb, right? Is that what you're bringing up?
On the
Trustee
planter box,
Ketchmark?
yeah.
Well, right, I mean, you said, you know, the cars in those areas just wouldn't be able to pull up all the way. Well, what keeps them from pulling up all the way? Running into the curb?
That-
Yes, yeah,
wouldn't
it's a
that only
curb,
be-
it's a barrier, I mean, yes.
No, we talking, not the street curb, the curbing around the planter.
Right, they're gonna see the curb with the planter. Let me say this too, our curbs are, I measured a few of the different, some of the cars actually can pull up and they don't scrape, but others on a low-hanging curb, they're not gonna be able to get over that second curb. Those are typically smaller curbs or cars that I would envision seeing. They're gonna see the planter in front of them, they're just,
Well, other than, I mean, I don't know, do you still have the Explorer? I know in my Explorer, I scraped that low curb pulling in there. So if you have another curb around the planter.
right?
Can I add one thing? I love this. I think it's amazing. But when, I want to make sure that, like, the size of them, so when someone gets out of their car and they're in the diagonal spot, that they can get around it, or they're going to walk through it to get to the sidewalk. So, like, the size of them will probably matter.
Right.
Like scooting in between, coming from their parallel parking spot to try and get into the sidewalk. Right? Yeah, good point.
What if you do it without the curb? you do the planters that size, but you ring it with the paver, so you have room for the trees, you don't have your tree grate. You can, I mean, they,
Wasn't Vince concerned about the salt splashing in and things?
I
That
still think people would walk through it more likely if it wasn't curbed. But I just want to, I'm just thinking about the size of it and.
You also have the mulch, if you, whatever
Sure.
you put in there, it spills out is a concern if you don't put anything up, like a curb around it.
but boy, if you're right on the curb with that,
We just don't have a lot of room.
right?
Yeah, we don't have a ideal situation. If we had 15 feet, then we'd set it off, 2 foot off the curb. We wouldn't impact the overhang. Give you a little bit of room to walk if you went straight to the sidewalk, but we have narrow, again, some of the business districts have 80-foot right-of-ways. Ours is just our normal residential street, so.
Well, and how many trees are we talking about there? How many are on, I mean, we can move them, right?
I
mean,
think there were about 8 per side with the current spacing, and right now, the lights are spaced at 60, and the tree grates are placed every other light, not in between every one. I will say, and there's further discussion, but it seems to me it'd be very busy to have like a tree grate between each of the lights if we're choosing a 60 or 70-foot spacing.
But if you do that raised planter, I'm thinking, I don't know if we still have the tree like right in front of, where do we had the complaints from one of the businesses that the tree was right in front of their business. Whatever, I mean, as we build these, I mean, you certainly don't want that raised up planter right in front of their door either, so now that sidewalk is even more reduced going into, you know, their building. If it's a tree grate, people can walk over that. If it's a raised planter,
Do you think the 5-foot sidewalk's enough, though, in front of their, I would think they could make the pedestrian turn.
okay, but how much are you taking away for the planter?
There's still 5 foot of sidewalk.
There's still
The
5 foot no matter
planter's-
what.
It's
So how big-
total of 10 feet, and the planter takes up 5, so you have a 5-foot sidewalk. That's the same width as our public sidewalks throughout town. I think the pedestrians could still get in and out of the businesses. Our discussions were more on these giant, when we have these big events, you know, when you do have tree grates that are flush, you can walk over there if you got 4 people abreast, but, I don't know, none of the staff like the tree grates. If you look in various towns, you'll see the tree grates are typically, they affect the trees, they get in disrepair. As Trustee Hendricks was saying, I had a picture that I didn't bring out tonight, but there's one where a tree got so large for the grate, it just propped up the grate.
I mean, this is somewhat a function of the lighting we choose too, to tie everything in, because you know how far apart the lights are, we have pedestrian lighting, and how many of these things you're gonna have and where. I mean, I think, I agree with Trustee Hendricks, the grates, and I think with staff, that the grates aren't gonna work. But, you know, in terms of adding more trees, you brought up, you know, the events that we have and how many things we have where we have the outdoor seating for these places. We gave that to the businesses during COVID, and it's become successful. We want to continue that, so we got to temper the idea of having more trees and more of these, you know, areas versus taking away seating, taking away traffic flow, taking away, you know, that type of thing too. So I think they're all kind of tied in.
And to be clear for tonight, I think it's helpful. There'll be some sort of committee with staff. Maybe there's a trustee or two that's on a committee. When we spot these tree grates or these planter areas, if you're putting trees, we have to be very careful. We're not at that level at a board meeting, but we had concerns back when this was initially built. You try to go right on a building line where 2 buildings meet, because nobody wanted a tree in front of their door, in front of their sign. So I'm presenting spacings that, like, they're all equal, but they're not exactly equal. We try to spot each one. So we can look at increasing the number of them at that time, but we'll be out walking on the street and picking actual locations. We're kind of looking for just a design concept consensus from the board so we can start moving forward.
Seems like maybe you could alternate trees, like those same planter boxes or something similar. Alternate with trees so that if you're doing like the prairie prairie grasses and stuff like that, and some that where a tree would be in front of a, you know, a business. And then you could fit the trees in between, you know, buildings and other areas. You could still add more plantings, but just have them lower. I mean, some of those grasses are fairly high, but so it wouldn't be like, you know, ground level, but it could still be visible from the windows of the businesses, would be appealing, would be prairie themed to kind of stick with, you know, the native plants. So they don't all have to be trees, I guess is my point.
One thing I'll prepare, Tim's mentioned, I'll put something to scale now that we know we're going forward with this. And I'll look at a couple of different, right now, if we stay with, I think we haven't arrived at a decision on the lighting, but that spacing will play into that. And if we go at the 60 or 70 foot spacing, which is probably about what we'd be if we just go pedestrian only, where it's 60 now. If you go every one, just envision a light, 30 feet later, planting area. I was thinking the planting areas are about 10 foot wide. They're not 5 by 5s. So there's not too much sidewalk in between them if we put them in between each light. Currently, they're between every other. Maybe the Board of Trustees wants to take a look what's out there on Grand and kind of, because I've driven by it forever, right? And I didn't quite realize that the strategy was every other light, and because it made sense. I was like, we're going to have like 20 feet between our lights and these planter areas if we put it in between each one. And then I went out and looked, and the current is every other. And that, to me, made sense, but maybe we can look at it that way. I'll put drawings to scale showing it between each light and maybe alternating each light and send that over to.
Well, and it's not necessarily a problem to have reduced area between the street and the actual sidewalk, the path that people are walking. I mean, you don't want people crossing between that too much. I mean, going in and out of their cars, sure, but as they're two throughways that you don't necessarily want to be intermingling. So having those planters, having more planters there can keep the pedestrians safer by keeping them apart from the cars too.
Okay.
Other than, and keeping that in mind, it kind of reminds me of when we do the music on Grand and we put all the chains up and that. How do people get from the business to the street? You know, they had to walk all the way to the end to get through that. So if the more we have, you know, are people going to be walking through the planter?
If they're only 10 feet long, you just walk around it.
Well, right, but I'm just saying is the more we get, the less sidewalk we have and there's less room to walk through. So
That's
just
true, but
something-
as long as you have openings in between, you'll still be able to.
I just don't want them to smash the plants.
You need to build
I'll
a
put some
hanger box?
exhibits
think that,
together,
yeah.
and I think I'd be happy to meet with any group and we walk out there. I think, I'm getting the feeling, because I think someone brought up the tables too that are out there, and I think by limiting it to, let's say, 20 or 25 feet, I just don't know how that affects the outdoor eating, or maybe that's not the priority, I'm not sure, but.
Well, I think it's something the board's got to consider. I mean, we know what we have now in Grand, and do we want to take away some? I guess your plan to come back with drawings and options, give us more options. I mean, you got some really good feedback from the board, but know that if we do this, we're excluding other things, so.
Yeah. Yeah, the last slide I had is just next steps, just to make sure we're all on the same page, so. I had approved addendum to the design engineering agreement. Unfortunately, there's a little more engineering if we add $1 million, but I think we should just flesh out. I don't want to do that the next meeting. We should flesh out what the scope of work is, so. I guess items 3, 4, and 5, plans are due to IDOT April of '24. Again, I indicated that there's typically a 2-month interval between our preliminary plans and final plans being submitted to IDOT, so we can, hopefully we'll have 80-90% of the changes by mid-April. If we come up with a few more tweaks for adding outlets, small stuff like that, easy to add all the way up till June. We do have a September letting, and We're looking at construction in '25. So, sounds like I have a bit of work, and I will try to get it done so I could come back in 2 weeks.
All right, thank you, Derek. All right, that leaves the last item we have is discussion about amending various sections of the village code pertaining to advisory commissions and committees. We did talk about this previously, and then issues came up about how it relates to, and Bob, are you going to serve 2 roles here, deputy clerk and presenting?
I guess so.
Bridget could never do that, so.
You know, most of this memo is the same as we discussed previously. What the board, what I heard the board wanting was a recommendation that was concrete and something that you could consider related to this issue that the Fair Housing Advisory Committee previously, or right now at least, its members are drawn from the Planning, Zoning, and Economic Development Committee, which is a subcommittee of the board. That committee right now has no members. It is essentially a defunct committee. So what I wanted to do here was just to simplify the process. There still needs to be a mechanism for if someone comes to the village with a fair housing complaint to have some entity investigate and hear the complaint. Previously, the people who were members of that that committee were drawn from elected officials. So my recommendation is to simply keep that part of the code the same, essentially because since this was created in 2007, the Fair Housing Advisory Committee has never been convened. It has never heard a complaint. So it's probably fairly unlikely that the board will be confronted with a fair housing complaint or many fair housing complaints. So the language that I'm suggesting is that it just be changed to state that the village president shall appoint 3 members from the village board, one of whom may be the president, to serve as the Fair Housing Advisory Committee as needed. And that would just simply solve that problem.
Sounds good.
Thank you. How does the board feel about that? I mean, it's a, you know, we had talked about the various options of turning it over to staff in some way, but this is actually a kind of a clean-cut, simple way to, we don't have to delete the Fair Housing Committee, it's just how the members are constituted, so I would be able to appoint members to it, and it would serve a need, and it hasn't had a need since 2007, but if we don't do it, it probably will need, so let's put that together. So, you know, again, as Bob indicated, the previous memo dealt with all the other commissions that are kind of no longer defunct, and the PZ committee kind of went away because we created the Brookfield Economic Development Commission. So, you know, Bob's memo kind of ties up all the changes that we need to make in the advisory committee sections of the code. So does everyone feel comfortable with the recommendations?
I'm good with it.
Yes.
Okay.
And then Adam would just need to create the language that you can consider at the next board meeting.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the legwork on this. We appreciate it. It's one of those cleanup things that we need to do, and that just kind of has been there for a while, and we just didn't get around to it. So this will clear it up, and then I'm open to requests to who would like to serve on the Fair Housing Committee and have another meeting to attend. So, okay. All right, that ends all the items we have up for discussion. I will once again open up to public comment. Is there any public comment? Yes. Would you like to come to the microphone and just give us your name?
Hi, Mitzi Norton. I'm here representing the Linda Sokol Francis Brookfield Library. And while this sounds rather redundant, I'm here on behalf of our library director, Kim Coffrin, who couldn't be here tonight. But we just wanted to offer our full support of the Cycle Brookfield and the Intelligentsia Cup. As Chris mentioned, the library last year served as a watching center, a cooling center, and they also had various programming related to the race, and they look forward to doing that again. So full support from the library. Thanks.
Thanks, Mitzi. Thanks for being here. Sure. Anyone on this side? Okay. Hearing no further public comment, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session at 9:24 pursuant to Section 2C5 of the Open Meetings Act to discuss purchase or lease of real property for the village's use, and pursuant to Section 2C1 of the Open Meetings Act to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific village employees.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, the motion was made by trustee Ketchmark, second by trustee Gahuli. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark.
Aye.
Trustee Cote.
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks.
Aye.
Trustee Gilhuli.
Aye.
Trustee Kaluzny.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned into executive session at 9:24 PM. Tim, are we